Okay. All right. Well, I am thrilled. I'm Buffy Philippel, and I am thrilled today to introduce just a fantastic fella that I've gotten to know a little bit, and I want to share him with you. Sekou Biddle. He is the Vice President of Advocacy for the United Negro College Fund. Sekou has been a teacher in the Atlantic Public Schools. He was program director for Teach for America and Ward 7. He was a representative on the State Board of Education, Washington, D.C., executive director at Jumpstart, and which does an awful lot of new businesses. And now for the past 8 years, he has been the Vice President of Advocacy for the United Negro College Fund. And I am thrilled to have him here on our TeamWork Online speaker series, Diversity and Inclusion, Best Practices. Sekou, welcome. Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks a lot, Buffy. I am really happy to be here and actually looking forward to the conversation. I know you and I and Danny and my colleague Diego and I spoke a little bit about some of the things we'd like to get into today. So I'm looking forward to having a great conversation. You know, I would just add, and Buffy knows this from our previous conversation, a bit of a sports fan. So having a little dialogue with people in the sports industry, I think is going to be fun and maybe unleash far too many sports metaphors. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation. I think there's a lot of opportunity here. I think for, you know, my role at UNCF, we're constantly looking for opportunities to partner with organizations around building opportunities for young people, in particular, you know, Black African-American students, around building college and career readiness and paths to success. So, you know, we've had a bit of success doing that over the last many years. In particular, one of the teams I lead in our student professional development program does a lot of work around internships. And we also do a good amount of work working with corporate partners to help source and build talent pipelines. So looking forward to today's conversation. Hopefully we'll get into some good stuff, and take it away, Buffy.
Great. And I want to remind everybody that if you want to ask a question into the chat box, please do so. And when I call on you, we'll let you open up your microphone and ask the question yourself. So we're going to make this feel like what it's supposed to feel like and have everybody be able to talk to each other all as if we're in one room here. So again, thank you for coming. Sekou, following the death of George Floyd and the pandemic, when athletes have been playing in the bubble and without the fans, players in the leagues and the teams have amplified the message Black Lives Matter, and seeing that on a lot of television, etc. LeBron James, Naomi Osaka, these are a couple of my favorites. Basketball and tennis, they actually even paused to play to highlight some of this social injustice. The commissioner of the NFL backtrack on allowing players to kneel. There have been a number of civil rights moments. Do you feel this is different? And if so, why?
Yeah. So I think the simple answer, I would say, and, and I've obviously, I do have to cop to, like, my knowledge is about what's gone on mostly in the last 50 or so years. A little bit of a sort of personal perspective. My mother was very active in the civil rights movement in the 60s with Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So I do have some insight into what life was like then and what the movement looked like then. So, what I think is interesting, what people like that who lived through sort of two eras of moments of civil rights, her generation feels pretty strongly that it is different. And I think the why it's different, to be perfectly blunt, is what we have seen is people and institutions that previously maybe nodded to or acknowledged that there were some issues in the country and that we needed to do better, have really leaned in forcefully to actually do more and better. So, it used to be people said, yeah, racism is a problem and lack of opportunity is a problem, and we should do something about that. And and that was pretty much it, right? And now we're seeing people and institutions, and you look at the protests, you look at who's out there protesting, and it's not just the folks who are most impacted by it, right? But it's the broader society that's saying, yeah, actually, for whatever reason, we didn't realize how bad this problem is, but we can no longer tolerate this. And I think, us as an institution at UNCF, like we have seen a sort of unprecedented, you know, outreach by potential partners who are, I think, having an awakening and having a sort of reflective moment where they feel strongly like we have to do something to correct the historical, injustice we have in this country. And I think, what's going on in professional sports is reflective of that. I mean, there's not much that's more mainstream in America than, sports in this country. And so when, the major team sports of the country are all saying like, we're going to do something about, we're going to tell people like, yeah, whatever you have to say about it, say it, suggests that this moment is different.
You had mentioned something about whether this is more transactional or more transformational. Tell me, what's the difference of that?
Yeah, so so the cynical part of me, right, several months ago was still largely in the camp that okay, people are saying, okay, wow, this is terrible, we need to do something. And everybody remembers this, like back in June, every institution, every person in America was rushing to release their Black Lives Matter statement and what they were in support of, and why things were so wrong. And I think that's easy, right? And organizations were making contributions here and there. But the real question I've always grappled with is, and this is sort of the personal part for me, which is, it's like people are recognizing there's a problem. Like I've known there's a problem my whole life. Like James Baldwin said, like a reasonably conscious Black person, right, is in a constant state of rage. You can't like walk through the world we're in and not be angry about what you see. And it's taken a while, but I will say that what I'm seeing is more genuine willingness to transform, because we're seeing institutions like ask the hard questions about what they have to do differently in order to exit this moment in a different place, and that includes things like, I think, people taking on the notions of some of this has to be about shifts in power. Like, how do you empower people? Not simply how do I diversify my organization, but if I look around and everybody looks like me, then what did I do to get us here? And what am I prepared to do to get us to somewhere else in the future? And I think, I'll be frank with you, I've had some conversations with leaders and organizations that have been, I think, very revealing, and people have been surprisingly open and frank. And I think, I appreciate the honesty, because I'm hearing people say things that have to be hard to say and, are hard to hear, but they reflect that they recognize what we're in and that we have to do something significant to change it, which is, also as a practical matter, I'm spending a lot of my time every day working with a number of current and prospective partners to figure out, like, how do we really move the needle on, diversity in organizations in a real significant and meaningful way.
Well, that's a great segue, Sekou, because we wanted to provide sports employers some insights on attracting a more diverse group of people, a look at what these underrepresented groups see and feel when they come into an interview, and successful companies that smooth integrate talent. Tell us a little bit about, and not to use this metaphor of offense and defense, tell us a little bit about what that means to you.
Yeah. I mean, I think you and I talked about this a little bit. I feel pretty strongly that the posture that organizations have to get to is reflecting on the nature of the problem, like recognizing that it's the people, it's the attitudes, it's the systems and structures they have that have led them to have less diverse workforces than the general population, or than they want to have. And then to go on the offensive to sort of challenge and build, like, what do we need to be doing? How do we need to go out to people and out to communities to build the processes to get the right people? Because historically, organizations have been on the defensive, which is, hey, how come you guys don't have a very diverse workforce? And then all the explanations come, right? Like, oh, well, we don't get this. I mean, there was a well-publicized discussion probably a month ago now, where, the CEO of Wells Fargo was quoted as saying the reason they didn't have a more diverse team was the talent wasn't out there. That didn't go over well in the general public, but it really didn't go over well with their employees of color, who took it to mean the reason why none of you all have these jobs is because none of you all are good enough to do it. I mean, and so, yeah, I think you've got to really, people say you got to lean in and figure out, like, what are we affirmatively doing to build a pipeline, build the relationships, build the connections to the pathways and places where we're going to get a workforce that is both more diverse than the one we have right now, but also, diversity as a means to doing a different and better job in the space that we're operating in.
So, Sekou, United Negro College Fund works with a number of historically Black colleges and universities in helping with the transition between school and work through programs that are funded by grants and corporate programs. Just to give us a little bit of context of your organization, who are some of the companies, just the names of the companies that the United Negro College Fund is working with today?
Yeah, good question. So just a few, and I could probably just talk about some of the ones that I've worked with actually today. So, all sorts of companies, all sorts of sectors. So, we've got programs with companies like Volkswagen, anybody who's ever eaten in a mall food court. We've got a large program with the folks at Panda Express. We've got we're actually doing a recruitment program right now for Best Buy. A number of major corporations that have internship and or scholarship programs. We've got things in the tech sector, folks like Oracle and PayPal. And, and it's sort of a interesting mix of both, large national brands and institutions, as well as, I've had some conversations recently with a good number of reasonably small local businesses that are looking to build, pipelines for diverse talent in their communities. In particular, you're knowing that sometimes in smaller cities in the country, it can be harder to be in the talent game nationally. So they're looking for, how do we build connections to young people to make them aware that there's these vibrant careers in other communities around the country.
So let's talk first about that typical student that you and I chatted about, the typical HBCU student that you come in contact with. Can you describe what is that typical student?
Yeah, I mean, sort of overly broadly, right? And so I'll first disclose, like, I'm an HBCU graduate of Morehouse College, so we at UNCF support 37 private HBCUs. There are 101 HBCUs around the country. And just for people, because this comes up from time to time, the HBCUs, the designation was basically made in 1964 through a designation by the Department of Education for institutions that were designed and mission oriented on serving, in particular, African American students. There are institutions that are predominantly Black that were not designated HBCUs at the time in '64. But they largely will serve the same types of populations. Principally, the majority of students at HBCUs right now tend to be first generation in their family to go to college. Low to moderate income, although that's not everyone. There are a lot of those students. So high levels of Pell eligible students based on, family and household income. So, it's a different profile than a lot of what you get sort of typical college students. And I think it's important to know that in addition to, who the students are, where they're coming from, HBCUs historically punch well above their weight in terms of outcomes for students. By and large, there's a study, and I'll get it to you just to share with the group, Buffy, that the folks at Lumina and USA Funds did a few years ago that sort of tracked outcomes for college graduates that were Black, and tracked a group of HBCU graduates and a group of Black college graduates from non-HBCUs. And the students from the graduates from HBCUs earned more money, were happier, and had a higher sense of well-being than the students who graduated from majority institutions. You know, I tell people, I've got a college student of my own right now. Everyone's got to make their own individual choice about what's the right place and fit for them. But I think what's important about what these institutions do is they do a lot of really building and support for young people around culture and identity. And, those ages, right, 17 to 22, when young people are in college, is just so critical on sort of identity development, that part of what we believe is happening is that young people are just building a stronger sense of self that is, in effect, inoculating them against many of the ill effects that we know to be true about racism in this country. So, I'm here to tell you, like, it's still hard to be Black in America. And I think oftentimes HBCU students are just better prepared to survive the rigors of being Black in America and in the workplace.
We talked a little bit about what then is the difference between an HBCU Black student and what normally might be the differences in their upbringing, right, of a non-Black family or student. What were the differences there, and why are there those differences?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it, frankly, is around things like, first of all, there's just the wealth issue, and I think there's people are learning a lot more now about the relative wealth gap between just Black people in general, white people in the country, and the degree to which that is a huge driver in life outcomes. And that's a lot of why Black college students tend to be both going to college from lower income households needing more financial assistance, but also graduate from college with higher levels of debt and therefore needing to enter into the careers in meaningful ways that help them pay off what it costs them to go to college and really start climbing up the career ladder and building income and wealth for themselves so that they can break cycles of poverty that oftentimes are occurring in their communities.
But what's the aspirations of these students as they're going to college? You're saying they're usually first generation. What would the parents think they should be, think they want to be?
Yeah, well, so it's interesting. We've actually, and I'll say in this link also, we did a study with African, and in particular, low-income African-American parents about 7-8 years ago. And one of the interesting things we found was the number one aspiration for low-income African-American parents, the academic aspiration they had for their children, was for their child to go to college, go to a 4-year college and get a degree. And that's because, in this country, like it's largely been the case that a college degree ends up being like your ticket or passport to a middle-class lifestyle and opportunity. And people, I think, get that, right? And so for a lot of families that are hovering right and around low to moderate income, they recognize that getting their students through this threshold can have transformative impact on their students. We also find, interestingly enough, it's a fun fact, tends to be the case across a family, that once somebody in the family goes to college, even across that generation, it tends to pull through other members of the family, cousins, aunts, nieces, and otherwise, because there's a bit of like the social capital around, like, oh, now that somebody knows how to crack the code and navigate the path to college, they can share that information broadly with everybody else.
So we all know that athletes are paid rather well in the front office, and we certainly can recognize that to be a professional athlete would be an aspiration of almost anybody. Front office personnel, though, might not be paid very well. Even at the team president level, we know that sometimes even the top at the business level might be making the salary of a bench warmer. The best way to get to the top in the sports industry, we're finding, is through ticket sales. But that pays the worst, really. It pays $10 an hour plus commissions in many cases. What's happening? What are we doing wrong here?
Yeah. So this is like the recognizing, this is true. I mean, for those of you all who ever been in and around government, this has been one of the problems we've had around, uh, unpaid internships on Capitol Hill, right? Like the path to a career on the Hill has been be a page or an intern. The challenge is if you're poor, taking on an unpaid internship is like you're paying for with time and money for opportunity that's going to open the door for you. And like, here's the thing, like poor people cannot afford to do that. And I think what we have to really open our eyes to is if we really do want to have a more diverse set of people in the workplace, and I would include diversity, across diversity, you know, income levels, like financial backgrounds that families are coming from, we have to acknowledge that if we set the bar where people have to take a vow of poverty to get in the door, we're weeding out a whole bunch of people. Like there's only so many people who are going to be willing to make the sacrifice and who can afford to make the sacrifice, because you've also got to keep in mind that, if I'm graduate college and like a typical college student have debt, I don't have the leeway to take a low wage job for some number of years, because eventually someone's going to open the door, because the oxygen is going to run out for me, right? Like there are other people, right, who can rely on parents and family and other ways to subsidize their life and their living until they do break through. I think we got to keep in mind that, in particular, like students coming from low income backgrounds are not going to have that leeway. And so if we set the entry points at such low income levels, we just have to acknowledge like we're not going to get like a diverse pool of candidates.
So are we discriminating just the way we're paying?
Yes. I mean, it's just that simple, right? It's like if what we're saying is we'll let you in, but we're going to let you in at at an income level that a person can't actually survive on, we're basically saying this opportunity is available to people of a certain class or certain level of privilege, because what we're basically saying is we want you to subsidize working for us until we've decided that you're good enough for us to pay you a living wage.
Very good point. Say that again. That made a lot of sense. Yeah, say that again.
Yeah. I mean, what we're saying, and this is true, like we're saying to a young person, we need you to subsidize, like we're going to pay you a little bit, we need you to pay the rest. And once we're convinced that we want you, then we'll pay you a living wage. I mean, as a simple sort of relationship, exchange, not many of us would look up and go, I'm going to enter into a relationship with somebody who's telling me they want to bring me in and then evaluate me to decide whether or not they want to make any kind of commitment. Like, and like, let's be really clear here. When we're talking about getting diverse talent into organizations, everybody wants these people. So like, it's a competitive enterprise here. And if you aren't willing to make the kind of commitments that demonstrate that you value a person, right, which would make them want to come to you, there's somebody else out there looking for them. And, frankly, there are other people out there willing to demonstrate that they value them enough to make them feel, wanted. I mean, you asked about, corporate partners that we have, and to be blunt, like several of them have said, part of the reason we want to do this is we want to establish with young people that we value them and want them to come into our organizations. And we start, there's now like a race to, it used to be the internships were at, rising seniors, so students after their junior year. And it's going down because corporations are realizing sometimes you get to them as rising seniors, they've already had a good experience somewhere. They're going to go to where they went to first. You're just an opportunity for them to like develop more skill. So now folks are pushing down to like, let's talk to students earlier in their career because everybody wants them.
Right. You also had made a comment. So let's say we do get them in for internships, or we offer them an internship. You had mentioned to me that there are issues with the internships that besides just maybe paying for an internship, what else does a student from historically Black college need?
Yeah. So I think, it's like everybody, right? If you're going to bring young people in, because you want them to experience your organization, because you want to convince them this is a place they want to work. You have to both say that, but you also have to make sure that they feel that, right? So people got to feel welcome, which means there's some recognition that, for instance, if you're dealing with college students, that there's going to be some engagement by your team to bridge the gap, whether it's generational gap or cultural gap. We've had issues, and this is like a good example. We've had issues where young people have really tough experiences over really simple things, like they go to an organization for an internship and like nobody there reaches out to them to like help them find a church to go worship in on the weekends, or find a place to get a haircut or get their hair done, right? Like really basic stuff, which is like obvious, but somehow you're saying, like, you can't say to a young person, we really want you to be here, and then but we want you to figure out how to be here. Like, if we want you to be here, then we're going to welcome you in and we're going to help you run the traps on what is it going to take for you to be both successful in our organization and successful and happy like in our community. And that, that takes some effort in thinking through what are the things inside and outside of the workplace that are going to make it helpful to some person, to a young person. And I think that includes thinking through, who is willing and able in the organization to talk to someone and be honest with them about what it's really like here. And, maybe we're on a growth trajectory here to be different and better, but we're not there yet. Like, I think people do value honesty. And we've seen this in organizations where, I told you, Buffy, we run a student leadership conference each summer. And, we tend to bring in a lot of, successful African-American, business leaders, because we want them to tell their stories to students. We also have to convey to students that, like, I don't want you to think that because you spoke with, 10 African-American organization leaders here, that when you all go off to your internship, this is what you're going to see in the workplace. Because we've had students call and say, it's interesting because I was feeling really good, and then I showed up and there's not a person of color in the building. And, like the reality, I mean, look, we have to be real, right? That's going to be a reality in some places, and that's okay. But let's not like let that happen to kids. Let's just tell them, like, hey, when you walk in the building, this is what it's going to look and feel like. But like, we want you to be here, and there's got to be somebody that they know they can go to and get the truth and like ask the questions that might be somewhat uncomfortable.
Well, let's pause a little bit here. Again, I'm Buffy Philippel, and I'm with TeamWork Online, for those of you who've come on and joined us. And we're having a good conversation with Sekou Biddle, who is the Vice President of Advocacy. One of the comments you had made about in a previous call was when somebody walks in the door and they don't see anybody that looks like them, then it starts to have them ask questions. And I think I paused in our conversation about exactly what happened to me at IMG. Is I was offered a position as a account executive. I had been in the offices of IMG, and they said, we'd like to hire you as an account executive. And it was offered to me by the executive vice president. I turned to his vice president and said, I'm not sure that I believe what you're saying to me, because I haven't seen one woman that is anywhere else but behind a typewriter. So are you going to do this bait and switch where you're going to offer me this job and then you're going to make me a secretary? And frankly, Sekou, I was 22 years old when I was making this comment. And does this happen? Is this what everybody else goes through? Is that you're kidding? I'm not sure I believe you.
Well, I mean, I think that's real. I mean, I think one thing we have to confront is that probably a lot of young people walk into workplaces and have that feeling, right? Very few say anything. And I think what, back to like our offense versus defense, like, I think organizations have to ask themselves, are we waiting for like the outlier person to call us on the things we haven't done? or are we going to just put that out in the open and take it on? Because the reality, Buffy, I mean, you and I talked about this. If you're waiting for somebody to raise their hand and say, this is ridiculous, like you're gonna be waiting a long time. Because I mean, we also have to consider, and this is true and real, like for a lot of young people, and I think this is true in particular for people of color and women, you know, we are coaching them a lot in life to be compliant, to like fit in, to get along, to not rock the boat, to like don't make waves, because you know that's the way to like be liked. And if you get in with folks, then it'll all work itself out. So a lot of them are walking in thinking like, this is bizarro world, but I don't want to say anything because right now folks seem to like me, and I don't. But like, so then nothing changes, and I think that's part of the challenge here is, you know, nothing changes in like the comfort zone, right? We have to get into the like discomfort to change and grow. But that discomfort needs to be raised like not by 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old interns. That needs to be raised by like organizational leaders and advocates who say, listen, guys, we're not living the values that the organization has on the wall here. And let's get into that. And let's think about what those things mean about how we support bringing different kinds of people into the organization.
So one of the companies you and I chatted about was a young person would come into an interview and they would see all white people interview them. And then at the end of the interview, the lone Black employee takes the person aside and says, let me tell you really the whole scoop around here. Is that a good technique, or what do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, look, as I think I mentioned before, like I'm a believer in like, I told my wife this, and we're still married, so it seems to be working. You know, I believe like you got to do two things. You got to keep it real, and you got to keep it positive. It doesn't mean you always keep it really positive, but if you do that, right, you know, people will say, okay, like, I get that it's not what you all aspire to be, but at least you're telling me what's really going on here. And, you know, we can work with that. It's when the person is looking around going, you know, and I deal with this because, you know, we do a lot of work around helping organizations build diversity pipelines. And in my career, I've had a number of search firms reach out to me to help reach out to diverse candidates. And I often find myself telling people, if you tell me you want help reaching out to a candidate pool because we value diversity in our organization, and I say, okay, I want to help you. So the first thing I do is what most reasonable applicants do is they look at your leadership team on your website and they make a judgment right then and there. Like, it's hard for me to say you value diversity when I look at your leadership team and everybody looks the same, right? And not only they look the same, right? Like let's keep it super real. They look the same, right? They went to like the same 6 colleges, right? They're all like, they're from the same 5 states. It's like, these are like all the same people. And then you're telling folks, but we believe in diversity here. And so the credibility problem you actually run into is the people who could help you get the diverse talent pull back because they're not going to tell their friends. Because I've had this happen. Tell somebody, I want you to reach out to these people because they're looking for diverse candidates. And the person calls me back and says, I looked at the website, like, I don't know that what they're saying aligns with what they're doing. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I can't disagree with that. Like, they are saying something, doesn't look like what they're saying is actually happening. And like, nobody wants to extend, you know, their credibility on your behalf if you're not really showing them you're committed to this. And I think that's going to be one of the challenges here. And I think that's the challenge that organizations have, especially when they internally go to, you know, women and people of color and ask them to help bring in or make comfortable diverse candidates coming into the organization, right? Which is, you want me to sell people on something that I don't see going on here. Like, I'm not sure I'm up for that.
So how do we change that? How do we break this? And, you know, because you've got to start with, as we said, that IMG, you know, I was the one woman agent. And fortunately, I think I did an okay job that there are a few more women agents after me at IMG. How do you break this pattern? What have you seen successfully done at organizations that can just get this thing started correctly?
Yeah. So I think, you have to be reflective. One of the things I'll tell you, Buffy, that has changed recently about some of the work, even around internships that we've been doing with companies, is increasingly companies are asking for us to help them like debrief what's going on with the interns they're bringing in and give them critical feedback on why might we not be attractive to or welcoming to diverse applicants, right? And this is sort of evolution, because at first people's strategy was like, just help us get 10 applicants for each job every year and like we'll get there, right? And then they're like, well, we feel like we're getting good applicants, but none of the applicants that we make offers to are choosing us. Like, what's going on here? um so I think that, whether it's with interns, and oftentimes it's with the people in the organization right now, it's how do you have honest, reflective, conversation, open up channels for people to tell you what they really feel, like in a way that's not going to be threatening or punitive. Because I gotta believe, I mean, let's just be like really real here. We're all among what, like 80, 90 of our best friends. The people in the organization know, right? Like all these organizations are like on some level of family. People know what's actually going on. And so if we just step back and say, like, I had a colleague I served with on the board of education years ago, used to always say, like, you got to be internally organized before you're externally focused. Like, before you start going out looking for people, like, get clear on where you really are and what your current people think and believe about, what are your blind spots and what are your issues.
The NFL has implemented the Rooney Rule. You seem to be fairly up on the Rooney Rule. Can you tell me what your thoughts are about that, and using that analogy all in sports?
Yeah, I mean, so this is what I'll say about it, right? Is that I think it's a really good example of, like, people talking about it versus people being about it, right? So, like, the Rooney Rule exists because of, the Rooney family that owns the Steelers. And right out of the gate, like, first opportunity they had, right, they not only interviewed but hired, a black coach. And that says a lot. It also says a lot that, like, their coach has gone on to be successful and has won Super Bowl. And I'll say, just sort of as a sort of management observation, they're one of the more successful NFL franchises. In the last 60 years, they've had 3 coaches, right? It's a bunch of other teams, and I'm not casting aspersions to anybody here, because all are great and all your organizations are fantastic. But there are teams that, say they're about diversity and they're going to consider candidates, and somehow they miraculously never can land on the right diverse candidate. But what they manage to do pretty regularly is not succeed and lose. So, there's a right way to do things, and there's like all the other ways. And I think it's a reflection in the case of the Steelers, it's a reflection on, I think you've got an organization that has really got an important set of values that they strictly adhere to. And I think more of us and more institutions have to think about, like, how do we truly live the values in a way that drives value for the organization.
You followed that up by a quote from John Thompson, the coach from Georgetown. Remind me what that was.
Yeah. So, born and raised in DC. So, Georgetown was always our team. And so I remember back in the 80s, when there was a lot of talk about the hiring of black coaches in college basketball, John Thompson made what that was a really important point, which is that success isn't like a black coach getting his first job. Success is when the coach can get his second job. And I think that's true. Like, we still tend to have, and I think this is what works against sort of diverse candidates in general, right? They tend to shy away from more risky situations because there's a feeling that I'm only going to get one good shot, right? So if I miscalculate or don't perform at the one shot I get, like, that's it for me. I'm not going to get another opportunity. And I think we have to create spaces and places in which, in particular, women and people of color feel safely that I'm going to get the same kind of shot and opportunity that everybody else gets, which means, like freedom ultimately means people have the opportunity to fail and recover from it, right? That the failure isn't fatal. But I think for a lot of, underrepresented groups, like there tends to be the feeling that if I don't succeed with the one break that I get, then, I'm sort of boxed out from the upwardly mobile ladder.
So that makes them a little bit more hesitant to take a risk, and you need to take a risk to be able to get to the top echelons.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we talk with our young people about this all the time. I think that's generally true, like in your professional life, that there's some high risk, high reward, moves you have to make. But it's hard to make those things. It's hard to take those risks when you're not convinced that there's going to be a second shot, right? And so, it's easy to take risk when there's, you're on a high wire, but the net is actually, a foot or two below you, so there's not really any fall. But when you look down and go, oh, that's a long way down and a lot for me to lose here, like I will just play it safe. But that's not how people make it, right? People make it when they are allowed to take risks and, take on challenges. Because also sometimes it's the challenges that allow people to sort of prove out what they're really capable of. And I think we do people a disservice by forcing them into play it safe opportunities, because then we don't get to see the best they have to offer. Like sometimes you got to put people in challenging situations so they can really be stretched to find out, like, when they have to dig deep, what can they really do?
But that bodes that you need to have mentorship. And I believe that the Jacksonville Jaguars has a very good mentorship clearly towards women. Tell me what you know about mentorship programs, and whose program have you seen that's done a good job in that?
Yeah. So I think that, this is why, and I'll send you this one of the slides we do on program design. This is why we think, the mentorship thing is hugely important, because it's both the, someone to provide guidance and feedback, but it's also someone to be a champion for maybe the blind spots that we have as an organization. So if somebody inside is hearing, oh wait, we've got, certain groups of people who are running into this challenge, when there's like a respected, influential voice who can turn inside and say, hey, we've got to deal with this, right? Like we've got people who are running into a problem that's preventing them from being successful or happy. And so I think it's hugely valuable. It also, I mean, let's be honest, it also sends a signal to employees that you really do care about and value them. Because I think everyone who's been reasonably successful anywhere could acknowledge that there are people along the way who have given them help, insight, perspective. I mean, you talked about my career in elected office. I mean, I spent a lot of time talking to people who aspire to run for office. And mostly the reason I do it is because when I ran, I called a lot of people I did not know to ask them all sorts of questions and help. And to the best of my recollection, many, if not most people gave me some time. So I feel like, yeah, I should do that for other people as well. And it's hugely helpful. And I think it's more helpful when organizations sort of build the structure intentionally, so you're not trading on who's going to be the young person who's going to seek out the mentor in the organization and find somebody who's willing to talk to them. Like, give them that built in.
Have you seen a program that you've liked a lot that does that really well?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I've seen a few. Most of our scholarship internship programs have a mentorship element in it. And it's because, like, it's just so important. One, because we're dealing with, for our programs, college students who are, during the school year in college, and then oftentimes in the summer in internships. And so having a person on our staff, like our relationship manager, who can both help them troubleshoot like random stuff that happens in school and in life during the school year, but also can help them troubleshoot on, I mean, when a 20-year-old who's at an internship for the summer has the dorm room they're in get flooded and, has a bunch of their clothes get destroyed, they're not particularly well equipped to like solve that problem on their own. And, having somebody who could tell them, hey, listen, here's what we're going to do. We're going to figure out how to sort out all your stuff. And I'm going to call in the office and let them know, like, you're not going to be in tomorrow because we got a little situation to deal with. Because oftentimes, a young person feels like, I got to show up to work because if I don't show up, they're going to think that like I'm a flake or something. It's like, no, this is life. This is important. Like we can handle it. And people will hear from somebody who's trustworthy that, hey, we had a little emergency. We're going to take care of it. And then things will move along.
You said that that companies need to be able to create environments that do not have an awful lot of pressure because there's an awful lot of pressure going on. Run through that thought process, Sekou. I thought this was helpful to understand.
Yeah. So I think, and I think it's like properly framed understanding what the pressure is, right? Like there's certainly what's the pressure to perform, right? So like all the jobs require people to be able to deliver, and there are inherent challenges in the work, and you want people to be able to prove that they're up to the work. But as I said earlier, like, I know this to be true personally, right? Memo to the world, like it is still hard to be Black in America. And so like, best I can tell, it's still hard to be a person of color and a woman in America. And so we have to, like, if we say we want to bring more diverse people in, we have to realize when they walk into our offices, they didn't stop being a woman or a person of color. Like they're still carrying around all the stuff they got with them all the time. So part of your job is to make at least the time in the office, in the building, like less difficult. You maybe can't solve for what the world is doing, but you can avoid adding on to the load that people are carrying. Because, if that's what people have to deal with, then like, I don't really need that. And, circling this back, like that is actually why a lot of young people today, even generations after, they've had lots of options of where to attend school, why HBCUs continue to be so popular in the Black community, because like I've been there myself and I've got lots of friends and family and who've gone through this calculation. But a lot of people make the like intentional calculus. They're like, listen, I could go to college where I walk on campus and I'm walking to my class one day and somebody's got a noose hung up in a tree. I'm gonna pass on that, right? Like I'm gonna go to school somewhere where people are gonna be nice to me, affirm me, support me, help me. Because, hey, I get the rest of my life to be out in the world dealing with, the virulent racists. I don't need that for 4 years of college. And I think, that's true for any person at any stage in their career, right? Like the people we all want in our organizations all have options. And so if we don't do something to make our organization a more attractive option, they will go somewhere else. And I think it's challenging, but I mean, you do have to like confront the fact that a lot of underrepresented groups, like they're like people's lives are hard, and you got to do something to make it at least marginally easier to be in your workspace, or they're going to find somewhere, which is also why you tend to find, big clusters of underrepresented groups working in certain spaces and places together. Cause like, that's the signal that there's something going on here that people feel affirmed by, and therefore like they're setting up shop in those organizations.
I'll take a pause here because I see, is it Cicely? Is that who buzzed in here? Do you want to jump in?
No, I didn't. I was just giving my experience as an intern, being a Black intern in an all-white company.
Yeah, tell us.
What would you like to know exactly?
Well, just tell us what you were writing there in the chat box. Just explain that.
Oh, so basically when I arrived, again, I was the only Black in this company, well, this organization. And so, they did the customary welcome to the team thing, but nobody like welcomed me to the team. And so at the end of the internship, I had brought it up in my exit interview, and they were just like, we had never thought of that. And it was just like, oh, okay. So my saying is like, if you're going to hire someone who's, you know, a different minority, just make sure that your culture is ready to receive that and be open to welcoming new people into your organization. Because it was hard at first, and then I met some people there, but it makes it easier transitioning.
So what could they have done better?
I mean, they could have just invited me to like church, just invited me to just like different things to do. I was basically like on my own. What I feel like, because I didn't know anybody in this city, so I was new to the city, so I felt like alone, but I eventually found people like 5 months into the internship, so.
Right. Sekou, what do you hear from other folks? And if clearly, if there's anybody else who has a story like that we can share, what stories have you heard from people?
Yeah, well, so interestingly enough, I mean, what Cecily put in the chat and just said, I think sort of resonates and is something that I'm hearing a lot from now employer partners who the question they're asking is, okay, we get that you can help us, source candidates, and we have, or we need you to help us like build like an intern program. They're like, but what we need is someone to walk through our intern experience with us and help us figure out what are the things we're doing, or maybe that we're not doing, that are going to lead the intern experience to not being positive for the intern. Because I think what people are beginning to get wise to is, a lot of times these intern opportunities are designed to create an opening and experience to get young people feeling positive about the organization and then want to come back to be full-time employees. And a lot of these intern experiences are having the opposite effect, right? Like the young person comes through, has an experience, and they're like, yeah, I learned some things that are helpful to me professionally, but what I learned about this organization is it's not a place that I want to work. And oh, by the way, if anybody that I talk to asks me about it, that's like me, I would say, yeah, I don't think that's something you want to be a part of, right? And so what we're starting to see and hear from companies now is a recognition that the experience they're providing is not only not convincing young people to stick with them, but it's pushing a message out into the world that this is not a place for people like them. And so I think organizations are trying to figure out, like, how do we reflect on and ask the questions or coach up our people, right? Like, what are a few things that we can build into the intern experience that gives us a better shot at making sure that the young people who come in have a positive experience and want to come back, or feel comfortable that we're trying to learn about how to build a diverse pipeline here. And so the kind of things people bump into that they feel like, I need something, there's somebody who's going to answer their raised hand or is looking for their questions or concerns to sort of help make it more comfortable. I mean, I think that, yeah, I mean, it's sort of similar to what I see. I think Wendy put in here in the chat, like, what are some of the more innovative practices? I mean, I think, one of them is organizations actually committing to having fairly high level people in the organization interface with young people, whether they are early career folks or interns, to sort of convey the, like, we're trying to learn, but also this is the degree to which we value you, right? Like when senior influential people in an organization are sitting down with, young people and college students, because you are who we want to have here, and we know that we're not doing all the things we need to do to make this the right place for you. Like, I'm the decider here, so tell me what's going on. I mean, that has an impression on people, right? Because they realize, oh, like, it kind of seems like they're serious. Like, the boss is here.
Wendy, you're on the call here. You had been recruited you were also from a HBCU school, and you were recruited by the Cavaliers. What was the success of that program for you to work with the Cavaliers? Why was that? What worked there that was welcoming to you, Wendy Ross?
Yeah. Hey, Buffy. Thanks so much for pulling this great forum together. And Sekou, thank you for all of your great insights. Thinking back to my experience with the Cavs, I think it was the personal connections that I gained during my interview process. So I had the opportunity to not only connect with individuals, you know, on a broad level, but African Americans who were in high level positions. The first person that I talked to was a woman by the name of Deanna Witter, who was the vice president of revenue. She's over ticket sales. And so I was able to speak with her on a real level, if you will, and really understand the ins and outs of the organization, the good and the bad. And I was able to see that the organization was really trying to push the agenda forward. They were genuine and really shared a lot of the values that I shared. So there was a great connection and synergy there. But it was really those personal connections, because at the end of the day, especially working in sports, as we know, you know, you're working tireless hours, you're working weekends, you're working holidays, you're away from your family so much. So the individuals that you work with are so important. And so at the Cavs, there was definitely a feeling of, you know, trying to embrace, trying to build that family type of atmosphere, but also keeping it real, because, you know, it wasn't all roses, but we were empowered to call things out that, you know, we wanted to make better.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And Wendy, you also didn't enter the sports business right out of college either. And tell us why.
Yeah, so shout out to my HBCU undergrad, Morgan State. I went to Michigan for graduate school, but out of undergrad, I'd done internships. I'd gone to Florida to do an internship with a basketball team in the USBL, which was a precursor to the G League, so a feeder team for the NBA. I'd interned with the Baltimore Orioles, with BET. But what I found was that, you know, I was working alongside, as an unpaid intern, I was working alongside entry-level individuals who were unpaid. And so in speaking with them and understanding the structure, I personally, you know, I didn't come from, you know, a high income family, you know, middle class, but three siblings, and, you know, my parents would not be able to fund me coming out of college and, you know, fund the early stages of my career. And so I had exposure into corporate America by way of inroads, doing internships with in consulting. And the consulting companies, those were the ones who were giving, you know, the offers with dollars. And you know, I needed to eat, and I needed to not, you know, go back to mom and dad, who, you know, as much as they would have loved to fund, you know, my early career in sports, that wasn't a reality for me. So to your point, Buffy, I did take a more roundabout way to make my way back into sports by going into traditional corporate America, always keeping a hand in sports. But I just couldn't, honestly, I couldn't afford it.
Yeah, yeah. You know, Wendy, I think there's an interesting thing about what you're saying there, because I do also think that, you know, organizations also have to be honest and confront, you know, resource limitations and realities, right? Like there does come a point at which you say, I want to do something, but I don't have the resources to do it. Is there a less conventional way? And can you communicate that to the target audience? Because I think that one of the things we're also finding that's important is that organizations are having to think through, well, what are the pathways a young person could take to get to a career or job opportunity with us that circumnavigates our entry point is one where a person who needs to make a living wage, you know, coming in would get in. And now, you know, so that's great. You can figure out the pathway, but then you've got to find a way to convey to the market, because if the students don't know, and I think this is part of what we have found, there are a lot of opportunities out there that today's college student isn't aware of because they're not highly visible, right? And so the people at the upper echelon aren't communicating out to students like, hey, if you want a career in professional sports, here's the way in, right? And here's another way in, so that a person could go, okay, the front door is not for me because, like you mentioned, the financial barriers, but the side door is accessible to me because, you know, Buffy and I have this before. I know this to be true in part because I have a student in college right now, and I've worked with a lot of young people in college. But, you know, most parents I know that are sending their kids off to college, and in particular, like low to moderate income households, they're not sending their kids to college for them to go off and get, a $10 an hour hourly wage job upon graduation, right? And so, like, you have to consider that whatever the opportunities you're pitching to students, they've got to pass the mom and dad test. Because if I'm talking to mom and dad over the break and I say, I've got this great opportunity with organization X, and I'm going to make $8 an hour, mom and dad are like, you got to be kidding me. Like, I mean, like, because there are people like you, let's be real, like, who are really sacrificing to help their kids get to and through college. And they're not going through all that so their kids can struggle the way they are. And that's just real, right? So I think organizations also just have to be creative, because I can appreciate there are times when the business model just doesn't allow for a lot of lavish spending to bring folks in, early career at, higher, salary ranges. But once again, like, if you don't do something different, you're not going to get a different class or kind of people in the door. And I think that's hard. And I also think, I think, Jeffrey made an interesting point, which I think I would attach this to what Cicely said earlier. Like, I think you'd be surprised the degree to which people saying and doing what's right, whether it changes what an organization does, is really, really important, because like other people are watching, and so, when people do stuff that they just shouldn't be doing, I mean, there's some element of like, well, that person is who they are, but there's some element of like other people looking around like, well, we know this person has an issue, but what's wrong with the rest of y'all? Like, nobody has it in them to say anything, like, and I think that's the most damaging thing, right? Is when it's left to fester that people realize that's what's okay here. So if like that's what's okay here, like, I'm out. Like, I can't do this. And I think there's a surprising amount of power in people, doing what they can do to signal to people what we think is right and okay. And I think oftentimes people miss those opportunities because they think, I can't change the larger structural issues here. And that may be true. But it's, it's a little subversive, it's a little revolutionary, but like all that stuff matters.
We had talked a little bit about what it's like when I was growing up, my parents, when I was born, you're either going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be an investment banker. They had aspirational ideas for me. And when I said I wanted to be a teacher, that was a little bit like, oh, you're kidding. I mean, that won't make a whole lot of money. Tell me, from these HBCU parents, when you're the first in college, do they have that understanding of a career path that we all did?
I would say yes and no. I mean, I do a lot of work in the K-12 education space, and we have really struggled and tried to work on how do we entice many more young people to go into careers in education. And the number one challenge, right? The top two influencers that are telling college students to not pursue, teaching careers and careers in education generally, right? It's sort of surprising, although when you think about it, it makes perfect sense. 1 and 2 are their teachers, right? So it's like teachers telling students who are talented, don't be a teacher, right? It's like, you won't make very much money, you won't get the respect, like, you're talented, you should do something else, right? And the other major influencer are their parents, who are saying the same thing. And, so yeah, I mean, the career path and opportunity means a lot to people. I think we have to, and that's part of why, we at UNCF are working with a lot of different organizations to help sort of diversify young people's understanding of what's out there, and not just what's out there, but the degree to which, your skill set can be used in a lot of different types of industries and organizations, right? So, being a finance major doesn't mean that you're on your path to working in a bank or on Wall Street. Like, yes, but then again, like, we just had several interns in the finance department of Indianapolis Public Schools, right? Like, there's a career in finance, like working finance in all sorts of organizations, but young people don't know that. And they don't know it because oftentimes the organizations that need them aren't in a place to market to them. And I think part of what we want to do, and this is what, Buffy and Diego and I talked about is like, how do we help better inform more college students today about the diversity of opportunities that are out there and the various ways they can match their skill sets to industries and organizations they might not even know are out there for them. Because I think the other part that's really interesting is that I think we can reasonably predict that a lot of the things that young people are going to school today to do won't even exist in 20 years. And so, it's incumbent on us to like keep in mind, like, hey, I think about major US corporations that when I went to college, people would have said, like, yeah, you really want to go get a job at Sears, like, not so much. But like our ability to predict the future on that is really hard. So I think we've got to help, like, and part of that is helping young people understand. And I think, back to Wendy's point, if you've got a variety of interests and a certain set of skills, what are all the different places you can use those skills?
Right. Let's go through a little bit about what TeamWork is, working with United Negro College Fund. Just a similar about all of that is that we will be providing to your students the job opportunities as they're appearing through our network to all of your upcoming students. We have also talked about having these kinds of sessions, whether they're live or whether they're on Zoom or virtual, to a variety of students that would have an interest at HBCU schools. And frankly, there are a number of teams that have executives from HBCU schools already. So it's not like we have not, the industry has not been welcoming to that, but we will continue to make that a priority for all of us. I would like to have Nicolette. Do you want to ask your question to Sekou and to the group?
Oh, I knew you were going to do that to me. So, we're in the process of kind of revamping our hiring practices. And one of the things that we've been trying to do is create a structured interview process with, structured questions and evaluation form to try to remove some of the subjectivity of the interview process. We've run into some, pushback by people who've done it the same way all along, right? Do you feel that, as a best practice to creating diversity and inclusivity in our business, that this is something that we should be doing?
Yeah, having a more sort of structured process where it's clear we're asking all of our candidates like roughly the same thing, and we're evaluating the same, the responses on some kind of rubric. Is that what you're asking?
Correct.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because I mean, you started down this path, and then you wanted to ask a question instead of make a statement, so I can appreciate that. But like, let's be honest, right? You can't tell me on the one hand you want a different outcome, but then on the other hand you want to keep doing the same thing you've been doing. Like it doesn't work that way. I mean, like the laws of like time, space, and physics like prevent that from being possible. If we've been we got here doing it this way, but we're convinced if we keep doing it this way, we're going to get somewhere else. Like, no. And these are the challenges, right? That a lot of people in a lot of workplaces are really stuck with, because you get into this conversation and people say, okay, well, we're comfortable doing it this way. We don't want to change the way we do it, but we want a different outcome. And we got to push people like, we're going to have to be uncomfortable, guys. Like it just, and that's hard, because what we're basically saying is we're advantaging it for certain kinds of people, and we don't want to level the playing field. And so, and then, the challenge is the people we're advantaging for are really people who in some way, shape, or form are just like us. So, if that's the outcome we want, let's at least be honest about it and, come clean and I'm a big believer in expectations or everything in a relationship, but people are saying they want a different outcome. So you gotta give. And I think that's the challenge. It's both the structured process, I would say, Nicolette, and also having some clarity around how you evaluate the responses so that that's less subjective as well. Like it's clear that somebody's exceptional in a certain area because they've demonstrated in some number of ways their exceptionality, not because like I got a feeling about it. Like a feeling is like interesting. It might give you some sense I did a probe on something, but like your gut is not sufficient to tell me a person is qualified to do a job. It just isn't.
There's an organization that makes sure that they have a diverse group of people, maybe the same, or a diverse group of people interviewing every candidate that comes across the pipeline. Tell me what you think about that.
Yeah. So say again, they got a diverse group of people interviewing the candidate.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's huge because, I mean, let's be honest here. Like, we all, what we hear is driven a lot by what we bring to the conversation. I mean, I'd love to sit here and tell you, I know a whole bunch of stuff and and I know some stuff, but I also know that what I know and what I hear is a function of my own lived experience. And that there are people who have a different experience who are going to therefore hear and see different things. That just like, there's no way around that, right? I mean, I've had this conversation around, our team working on building programs to help, funnel larger numbers of women and girls into certain fields. And like, I found myself like having to point out, I'm all for this cause, but like, there's only so much I have to bring to this conversation, right? Like maybe what I have to bring to this is like, I can get the donor to come up with the money. I can help us design the program. Like I can do, but like, what I can't help you do is get inside the head of what it's like to be a 17 to 25-year-old and figure out what is it they need. Like, I mean, I can tell you what I think, but I'm pretty sure a better way to find out is ask people who've been through that experience already, like what works and what doesn't and what they need. And so, yeah, I think, the more diverse the group can be, and I think, connected to sort of what Nicolette said, it also helps benchmark it when, two or more people are hearing one person, and then let them check what they said they heard. Because I mean, I've done a lot of group interviews for my team hires, and it's surprising sometimes how three people in the same room listening to the same candidate, and we lay our cards on the table like, here's what I heard, and it's like, huh. and once again, like I think it tells us much more about us than it does about the candidate.
Right. What do you do about somebody though that's quiet, right? You told us that that woman or the person of color has been taught to downplay themselves, not boast about things, try to play the subservient role, apply for those jobs that are service instead of this ones that take risk. How do you pull that personality out? How do you really find whether that person is there?
Yeah. So, I think one of the things that I try to do and try to tell people about, sort of interview processes is convey to the candidate in a way that's authentic to you and your organization. So that's I think that I want to start with that point, because the way I might present it might not be the way you present it. So I think that's important. But what I always try to convey to candidates in an interview is, I want this conversation to operate in a way that when we're done, I know enough about you to make a decision about whether or not I think you're the right person with the right skills, knowledge, ability for our organization. And I want you to walk out of here with the same information about us. Right? Because what gets missed sometimes is we think it's one-way deal. We're evaluating you, and then we're going to tell you whether we want you or not. And I always want to empower candidates to understand that you should walk out of the room knowing, because sometimes candidates should walk out of the room knowing, I'm glad I went through this experience, but this isn't a place I want to work for any number of reasons, right? Like sometimes it's not bad. It's just, they're doing something there. It's interesting, but the way they do it, or, it's not what I want to be a part of. And that's okay too. I mean, I think cultural fit has a lot to do with, success and happiness of the organization. But I think it's important to convey that to organization, to individuals in interviews. Like, we want you to learn about us. And so the only way you can learn about us is you have to ask us things you want to know. And once again, like, if you get an actual conversation where you get a candidate asking you questions, well, a lot of the questions they ask you will tell you a lot about them, right? It tells you how they think, what they value, like what they're interested in, what they're potentially concerned about, right? But if you leave it as a one direction conversation, the person who isn't all that outgoing, right, or is worried about seeming, but let's be honest, like the words people say, like, oh, they're too aggressive, or they're too pushy, or they're like the kinds of things, that we know that in some candidates we love that stuff, right? And in some candidates it's like, and sadly a lot of this is about gender and race. Like, there's certain things that manifest in a conversation that certain people, when they do it, like it's a winner for them, and other people, when they do it, it's like, oh, we don't like that.
Right. Yes. A woman can seem too aggressive, and a guy, that's a good thing to be aggressive, right? Well, you have provided us some terrific information, Sekou. Could you tell us again, just what does the United Negro College Fund offer employers? What are some of the programs that you offer? Tie this up a little bit. I mean, I think the other thing is, I wonder whether people could have you come and be able to speak to their leadership.
Yeah. So more than happy to do that. Absolutely. So here's what I would say about speaking to organizations and their leadership. Would love to do that. Would love even more to figure out, how can this be a two-way street, right? Like, we'd love to work with any and all of you and support your organizations on like work that they do that can help build opportunities for young people to find early career success and to help you diversify your organizations. But we'd also love to partner with you on spreading the word about your organizations, your industry, with young people we have in college and various programs today, so that they can sort of expand their horizons and what they think is out there for them. I mean, I think one of the more important and empowering things we can do for, talented young people is help them better understand the diversity of options out there. Because the more they recognize that there are options out there, the more empowered they are to pick the right thing for them. And I think that's really, really important. Wendy's keeping it real today. How ready and willing do you think companies really are to act on their Black Lives Matter proclamations? Yeah, I mean, yeah. So since we're keeping it real, I think it's a spectrum, right? I think that there's at one end organizations of people who are saying things they feel like they have to say, because if they don't say something, they're gonna get crushed, right? I mean, that's just some folks are like, I just got to fill the space for the moment, and then hopefully things will dissipate and like we can do whatever we're gonna do. I think at the other end of the spectrum, though, I'm definitely having experiences with organizations where it's become super real. And I think, Buffy sort of mentioned this in the setup, but I want to peel this back just a little bit for everybody. Because if we think about, and I know many of us probably don't want to think about 2020, we just want to turn the page of 2021 and hope for something better. I think we can reasonably surmise that it can only be better in the future. But in 2020, like, think about what has happened, right? We went into this pandemic shutdown, and early in the shutdown, what started to happen? Well, first of all, people began to realize at like scale that they'd never seen before, that the pandemic, like the disease itself, was disproportionately impacting Black people, Latino, like people of color, and low-income households, right? Adversely, and then we went from the immediate effects of the pandemic. And I think you think about this, like, I'm an old classroom teacher, like, this is how people learn, right? Like, so the country is sort of seeing, wow, that's interesting. That's like fascinating. Like this thing is happening, and why is it hurting these people so much more? Right? Like the people who it's hurting know why, right? Because they're living that life all the time. So then the next thing that starts to happen is, as we go into real hardcore shutdown, and like shutdowns are going to be for like weeks and months, the economy starts to seize up. People start losing their jobs like by the millions. And the same thing happens. It's like, oh, wow, people are losing their jobs, and now people are economically unstable. And it's hitting the same people that the disease hit. So they're getting hit harder than everybody, and they're getting hit by disease, they're getting hit by economic impact. And then, you know, sort of we start to have like, so Ahmaud Arbery is like hunted down on a jog and killed on the street for no apparent reason, right? And like, you know, police charge into Breonna Taylor's home and shoot and kill her, and a police officer like kills George Floyd like on the street. And like, let's be honest, like most of this stuff is a function of, because lots of people saw it like on video, that it became real. But I think like those things happening have sort of helped a lot of the nation realize, oh, this thing we've kind of kept hearing about in the background around race and disproportionate issues that Black people are facing, like that's what people mean. And I think, you know, to your question, Wendy, that the companies and organizations that are at the end of really doing something about this now, a lot of their leaders legitimately, as hard as it can be for a lot of us to understand, right? A lot of them, it took all of that to sort of like push through to help them realize, oh, that's what people mean when they say systemic racism is doing these things to people. Like, now I get it. And you know, like I've had to share with a lot of my friends who are like, wow, you seem to be handling this well. And I'm like, well, you know, like I'm not surprised. Like that, you know, I just be honest with people, like it's not surprising to me because this is the world we've been living in. And you know, on some level, I feel like the reason I didn't explode and be outraged is because I'm always angry, because this is a damn outrage that we live in. So I think we've got more people who are like awakening to that and realizing they've lived and professed a set of values that they have to change what they're doing to be congruent with what they say they believe. And I think all this evidence, there's nowhere to hide now. It's like what else is it they need to see to convince them that there's really a problem? And the challenge is just that it's a real uphill battle, because people are beginning to realize the degree to which it is so deeply ingrained in the structures and the systems that people start to try to pull things apart. And they're like, wow, like the barriers are so profound and the problem is so big that I think there's going to be a bit of people, I think, giving up, like, oh, wow, this is big. And we can't really do anything, you know, about it. But I do think, yeah, I think we have a spectrum, and it's a tough one. I mean, I appreciate, you know, Buffy reaching out and the folks at TeamWork Online, like reaching out to us about like, what can we do? And all of you all being here today to talk about this. Cause I think, you know, the answer is there's a lot we can do. It's going to take a lot of us doing a lot of things. It's going to take a lot of us trying a lot of things that, you know, we think might work, that maybe some will and some won't. And I think that's okay. But I think if we all legitimately like put one foot in front of the other and work together to create opportunity, to improve mindsets, right, to grow, I think, because I think we also all have a lot of growth to do on how we change the sort of conditions that people are growing up in, and sort of the conditions of our organizations that have allowed us to get here. I mean, I think that for people in underrepresented minority groups, it's challenging to hear leadership organizations go, oh my God, like, I'm just now realizing this is a problem. Because a lot of us are looking around like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, how can you look around the office and not be aware that like there's some imbalance here on who you all let in the building? But, you know, I think we got to take people at their word and say, okay, like, we all have some growth to do. Like, you know, some people have some real growth to do in some of these areas that's really important. But as I mentioned earlier, I mean, I'm seeing change in some significant, profound ways. And sort of one last little note I'll put in here is, because I've traveled a lot for work over the years, and because a lot of our schools are in the South, I traveled to a lot of places that have been like important in the civil rights movement. And so one of the things I think that's kept me grounded in like the reason why racism is still present is because you go through a lot of these historical displays and you see, people protesting, integration and civil rights, like in the 50s and 60s, like protesting, like saying, we don't want Black people in our schools and our neighborhoods, all these other things. And some of these displays, like when you see little kids, right, in the 60s holding up signs talking about go home, I can do math, right? Like if you were like 7 in the 60s, like you're like in the midst of adulthood right now. And I just don't think those people who felt that way, whose parents taught them to feel that way, 40 years ago, flipped the switch in their head and said, oh, you know what? We were wrong. Like that didn't happen. I mean, and that's like, we should just acknowledge like that did not happen. Like they maybe got the message they couldn't be out loud about that anymore. And maybe in the last few years, they've got the message that it's okay to be more out loud about it, but we'll leave that discussion for another day. But so I think that, people are realizing that like this is still out there. So the other day I'm out for a quick run and I turn the corner. I'm off in a different neighborhood because my younger son's at soccer practice and I'm running, people are being appropriately polite to the random Black guy in their neighborhood that they think they should wave and say nice things to. I come around this corner and this kid is like probably 8 years old. Little blonde haired, blue eyed white kid, no shoes on, clearly running from his house like to a friend's house. Turns the corner, sees me, and like waves like, hey, how you doing? And I'm like, far be it from me to extrapolate too much, but like that's an indication that like things are different. Because when I walk through the Birmingham airport, that same kid is holding up a sign say, go home. Go home. So, things are a little bit different now, but we still got some work to do.
Sekou, I really, really thank you for just more enlightening us as to what's going on in the Black community, just with HBCU schools, a little bit of touching on some of the programs that you've worked with these other organizations. I will, by the way, send his email to everybody who has signed up for this program. And I'll put a little bit more information of some of the programs that the United Negro College Fund does. But if anybody wants to continue this conversation, please let me know. I'd be happy to pull this together. I think you've enlightened me so much about what it feels like. And I think many of us just need to know, need to hear and listen to that in a very open and honest way. So thank you so much for everything you've done here and giving us, as I said, I think as John Thompson said, it's not necessarily the first Black coach, it's actually choosing a second Black coach after the first Black coach. That is success. So thank you all very much. Buffy Philippel with TeamWork Online. I really, really appreciate you all joining us today. And thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
now.
Great to see you all. Looking forward to working with you in the future.
Bye-bye.